And Lydia, do you mind sharing the presentation for all of us? Awesome. All right, well, in the meantime, so thank you, Lydia, for sharing. So my name is George Harb. I am one of the community historians at the Arab American Museum. I've been there for about 2 years, and I've been working extensively with Shada. We got hired around the same time, so we've been working pretty closely together. We've collected about, Shada, how many interviews have we collected so far?
Ooh, too many. The collection has over 400, so we're definitely added a bunch just within the last 2 years of that. So,
Definitely,
yeah.
definitely. So as you can see, we're always busy at work. We're documenting oral histories, collecting oral histories, transcribing oral histories. So first of all, I just wanted to thank first and foremost Lydia and Elmahaba Center for their interest in collaborating with us for the Arab American National Museum and Elmahaba Center to kind of talk about oral histories. And just like Lydia mentioned, this is at a very important and a crucial time for us to talk about oral histories and document oral histories. And so I will introduce Shada. Shada, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. I was waiting for my slide. Yeah, no, thank you, Lydia, so much for hosting us, and we're so honored to be in on this conversation with Al Mahabba. You guys are doing incredible work with the community, so it's really our honor to do this work. My name is Shadan Najim. I am a community historian like George, and we did start around the same time. For me, it was just over 2 years at the museum. I work more locally with the Arab American community in Dearborn, Michigan. So it's really like local stories that I'm collecting. So a lot of immigration stories, entrepreneurship, small business owners, just yeah, the various incredible stories that we're collecting. George and I do also travel. We try to do that a couple times a year to different Arab American communities and try to really go out to people to collect their oral histories and be introduced to their environment, to their city. And we try to document that and also add it to our collection. So yeah, and before then, I was kind of always involved in nonprofit work and just community-based work. And I studied anthropology, social, cultural. So there are really just so much love for community work and documenting storytelling. So that's me. The transition of the slides is so slow.
So if you guys didn't know already, that's me. And then this is Shada. All right, so we're here to tell you guys today a bit of an overview of an oral history. So oral history defined, do you mind hitting it one more time? There we go, thank you. So I gave you guys a couple different definitions of what an oral history is. So oral history, defined by the Oral History Association, is a field of study and method of gathering, preserving, and interpreting the voices and memories of people, communities, and participants in past events. Another good example is from the Smithsonian Institution archives, which is oral history is a technique for generations preserving original, historically interesting information, primary source material from personal recollections through planned recorded interviews. So as you guys can see, what an oral history really is. It's probably one of the oldest forms of history that's collected, just because, as we know, there wasn't a form of writing. Most traditions were passed down orally, and most of our ancestors, even recently, did not know how to read, and that's how they passed down their family history. Can you hit the next slide for me, Lydia, please? Awesome. So just kind of an overview of oral history. So kind of like I said, it's an oral tradition and it's most likely the oldest form of history and it's the first kind of history. So as history was passed down verbally down for generations. Modern day oral history documentation, it didn't really become popular until the 20th century, like towards the beginning of the 20th century, I would say mid 20th century, which is during the 1940s. And it was by, his name was David Border. He started documenting uh, the oral histories of, I think it was World War II survivors and things like that. Oral history was not something that was traditionally practiced, and just kind of like I said, most of it was passed down orally. Shada, you did share with me a fun fact about oral histories and how they were not properly documented, and they were just kind of just discarded once they were transcribed. Can you actually share that really quick?
Yeah, it's I recently did this conference with the Oral History Association conference. It was about like AI and oral history. But anyways, they were talking about how yeah, how like recorded audio interviews were just like completely destroyed in the like early on, and it was because they thought the transcript was sufficient enough in telling stories. And it's really sad that a lot of like human history, not just Arab, like human history is was destroyed, actively destroyed because people didn't see the value in it, like researchers didn't see that. So yeah, I'm gonna go more into it and why it's so important to document it. So yeah, so what, like I'm gonna say a few points why our oral history is important, especially coming in from the Arab American National Museum and like how we view it. So obviously the first thing is to preserve and document unique stories of the Arab American community, and showcase the power of the word and personal recollection of firsthand accounts. So, oral histories are very personal, and they're usually, like George said, they're just passed down from generation to generation. And these stories are usually almost never really written down and documented. So it's just this is how families continue their traditions, and history's passed down is really orally. And so where we come in, we're really trying to collect these unique stories and very detailed stories that otherwise might be just lost or forgotten over time. Think of like maybe the stories your grandmother told you growing up, and or like your aunties, or anyone from the older generation. Those, if they're not documented or written or recorded, they're lost. They're lost with that generation, which is really sad. It holds so much of cultural value, personal family value. So definitely it's important to document these details of our lives and of our community as a collective. And yeah, so for us, it's really, sorry, next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so yeah, the oral histories are also used. They're published online for us in the museum, and they're accessible to everyone visiting our website. So they're really used for many purposes, but the main comments we get is that they're used for like genealogy to trace down family ancestors and to really create like a family tree and learn about the certain villages and people coming from certain regions. So there's that. We also get a lot of academic researchers interested in oral histories because like I said, they're so personal, and these things like these information and personal accounts are not found in textbooks and just like written materials. So it's really a special place for researchers to find information, accurate information from community members themselves in their own voice. Um, so these are some of the uses. Lydia, do you mind showing the website? I put the link in the previous one. I just kind of want to show everyone what it looks like. So scroll down. This is where the oral histories live. It's in the special collection archive in the photo in the middle. Yep. Yeah, so this is where the stories we collect live, along with different documents and materials that are also relevant to this person or family. So if you want to go down, and most of them are under the oral histories and digital scrapbook collection. Yep. So this is a little bit of an overview, and yeah, so a lot of them are just here, accessible to anyone, and a lot of them are, like I said, from the local Dearborn area, but also some were collected nationally, some were donated by people, so they really come from all over. But yeah, just wanted to share the website. Thank you, Lydia. And oh. Next, yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about what oral histories can look like. And there's different formats. There's different ways of doing oral histories. Obviously for your own purpose, right? The project you're working on is going to look different. So for us, we do a lot of video recorded interviews. For example, this interview with Asal Wahdan, it was recorded for the Al Hadiqa rooftop garden. It was done by our videographer, Jacob, at the museum. So obviously it looks very neat. It looks pretty. There was a lot of focus on aesthetics. So for the purpose of that project, we needed to, publish this online and make flyers and social media. So the look of it was also important. So and yeah, so this can be one example. Another example is just audio recorded interviews, which we actually do a lot of. Those are very easy and cost efficient. Like it's just you need an audio recorder, you can do it on your cell phone, very easy and accessible. And so we tend to do those a lot. And they capture the story. So really they serve the purpose that we're looking for them to do. So a lot of the interviews are audio recorded, and I usually try to like attach a profile photo of the individual or whatever the individual interviewee has donated to us to use, like family photos or them at their work, like photos of their ancestors. So there's some context there. Yeah, and all interviews that we do are transcribed. Also another way of preserving interviews and also making it easy for people that don't necessarily need to watch all of the video of the interview. So, and I don't know, George, you want to say anything about your interview with Terry?
Yeah, so depending on just kind of going bouncing off of what Shada said, so we have different mediums of oral histories, which can range from either it's the preferred method that we like to use at the museum is usually MP3 file, so it's an audio. It's usually an audio interview. Most people are most comfortable that way, but when we have like a specific project that we're working on at the museum, we tend to do a video, just like what Shada said with the gardening. As you can see from my oral history, that one of the ones I did is I attend a yearly conference, which is called the American Federation of Ramallah Palestine Annual Convention. So we try to document as many oral histories as we can in a very short amount of time. And also something that I wanted to mention is when we document oral histories at the museum, it's basically for any and all Arab Americans. So Shada works with the local community, but she also works with the outside community. I work a little bit more nationally, so I have a bigger, broader scale that I get to work with. And usually Shada and I both have very diverse oral histories that we like to focus on. Um, one of them being we have an upcoming trip that's actually going to Bay Ridge, where we're going to be documenting like the local Palestinian American stories and the local Yemeni American stories. And just kind of like we're here with Elmahaba, we're looking to also collect, like Egyptian American stories, Coptic American stories. And do you mind going to the next slide for me, please, Lydia?
Oh, sorry, just before we move
Yeah,
on,
go for it.
I also wanted to mention our most recent use of documenting oral histories has actually been over Zoom, which it really opened new doors for us in terms of like reaching new audience and people across the country. So Zoom has been a really incredible medium for us in collecting oral histories. And think of that if you're looking to document interviews or stories from someone who's not necessarily close to you. So just keep it in mind. Thank you.
So the next component that we're going to be talking about are some of the exhibits in the museum and how oral histories are also a big part of the exhibits that we have. So just kind of like you can see here, that we have a section that talks about Yemeni immigration. We have a part that talks about entertainment and different Arab Americans that, are in entertainment. But a big part of the exhibits do contain oral history. So for almost every item that you see in the museum, there's an oral history that goes with it that makes it valuable. So just because we do have something in the museum, it doesn't mean in any museum, it doesn't mean it's of like severe value or incredible value. The value behind that object is the story behind the object, which is what makes it important. And that's why the Arab American Museum is so important in what it does, because not only does it preserve those items that were given to the museum, but it also preserves the story behind um, those materials and those people that did come to this country, and it does preserve their story. If you could go to the next slide for me, please. So just kind of like I'm saying, so objects and oral histories do go hand in hand. And also another component that Shada and I get to do, which is also not very often, but it's fun when we do get to do it. So I'll give you an example of one of the oral histories that we conducted was with the mayor of Patterson. His name was Andre Sayej. Um, he's been mayor of Patterson for a few years, and he has this really cool habit of naming streets after the different ethnic groups and the different nationality groups in Patterson. So one of them was Palestine Way. So we actually got his story as mayor, how he grew up, how he was raised. And actually, we actually got him to talk about, how did he name Palestine Way and things like that. And there was a whole celebration. So Shadla and I thought, well, why not get a sign? So we happened to get a copy of a sign that was in his office. If you can see, he signed it. It was an excellent story. Um, yeah, if you could go to the next slide really quick, but while you go to the next slide, just to emphasize, object collections are very important for the museum. Oral histories that go with it are also very important. So we also just want to talk about some ethical practices that come along with oral histories.
Oh,
Um,
sorry,
yes,
George, to interrupt.
okay.
I was just gonna add also if for the object portion of this, so also think of oral histories as adding context for or like an object. So for example, you have like a box of photographs from a certain time period from a certain individual. Instead of like well, this can help you. You can do both, but like cataloging and also like indexing, but also adding oral histories, which adds so much value and context to objects. So it's and a little bit about the history of the museum. So when it was opened in 2005, the way the exhibits were built were actually by making like an open call for the community members to bring in an artifact, but also to bring in their story with it. So a lot of the oral histories were collected during the opening, which informed the exhibits. So just a fun fact.
That was a great fun fact, and I'm actually so mad at myself that I forgot that.
No.
Something also that Shada mentioned that was also a very good point is, and something that I also touched on, is it gives the context of what the item is. So like I'll go with the example of the photo. You have a photo, you don't know who's in it. If you have like an older or an elder person that happens to know, you can also document them talking about that photo. You'll have a constant recollection of who's in that photo, maybe what happened in the photo, when the year was, anything with that kind of context. So just to move on, we're gonna go talk about some ethical practices of oral histories. So as community historians and any person that does an oral history, there's a lot of ethics that go behind it because you cannot record anybody without their consent. So I'm going to emphasize consent, 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 because the interviewer or the interviewee has to consent to them being recorded. That's the most important aspect. In our case at the museum, we use a form that we're going to talk about. But in the case that it's a very like informal, personal within your family, you have to at least ask them for their consent, and they have to verbally consent to you. Another big component is that the interviewee has to be comfortable and they have to know that you are interviewing them and what the interview is going to be used for. So usually, I talked about this earlier, like when Shada and I have certain programming that we have to go along with the museum has going on. So like with the garden, we might ask some questions about like, the gardening practices, how important was that in the culture, things like that. Or an example of the Ramallah Palestinian that I do. We might focus a little bit more on, like their childhood, how was growing up in the hometown that they grew up in. And that's something that they'll have to know. And then also we also have to recognize that the museum opens these up for researchers to use too. So they might want to know that whatever they're saying might be used for research purposes as well. So then another thing that we also do is at the museum is we like to give a hard copy of the interview to the interviewee, just so they have it for their own family records, and we also have it for our records. And Shada, if you wanted to add anything to that, and then we can go to our next slide.
Yeah, just like you, George, I do want to emphasize that the sentence that says consent is an ongoing process. So by that, I really mean consent has to be continuously given at every stage of the oral history process. So like first when you're introducing yourself and getting to know someone, the interviewee, you're gonna ask for their consent, obviously, but also during the process. So like a lot of times during interviews, we see people they might share something that maybe they didn't really think about, or maybe they regretted sharing it, or maybe it was too much. So they might ask you like to edit that out, or actually to just like not redo the interview, not use this recording. And we just have to really be careful of that and listen to the individual, respect their needs and respect what they're asking you. So just because like they signed a consent form in the beginning doesn't mean that at any point they can't take it back. So that's what I mean by it's ongoing, and just making sure that you're checking in with your interviewee throughout the process and that they are really okay with you sharing their interviews, especially if like for us as a museum, we're publishing it online and it's available to anyone and everyone. So yeah, and even family members, like I feel like a lot of times people underestimate that. They're like, oh, it's just my grandma, but like maybe grandma isn't comfortable with these information, being posted on social media and such. So just be very mindful of that. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, also something I wanted to add is their consent is also, they can also be conditional about it. So if, for example, someone wants to do an oral history and they can add, well, I don't want this released for another 10 or 15 years, for example. We have to legally abide by that, or we can get in some severe legal issues. And that's just kind of standard practice for everyone. It's you have to um, give them their respectable boundaries. So on this slide, and you guys can see it. So one thing that's super important besides the consent is that you have to be able to separate yourself from the person and their personal beliefs, because that would be a bias, and we cannot have any bias when conducting an oral history. So, for example, if you believe this and this person believes that, that shouldn't be affecting the oral history at any point. So if you don't feel comfortable with that, I would probably suggest maybe not doing it. But if you're able to, that's what you're mainly going to have to focus on. And then what I like to do beforehand, so you can see where it says you must respect the interviewee's right to refuse to discuss certain topics or subjects or anything like that. I usually like to meet with them before. I have the standard practice where, and I'm sure Shada does something like this as well. I like to meet with the interviewee before we even conduct an interview just to get to know them a bit. And I like to ask them, are there things you don't like to talk about? Are there things you don't like me to ask about? Just to make sure that their interview is as concise and as comfortable as possible for them, because they are letting you into a space that is very personal for them. And you have to be able to respect those boundaries. Shada, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Um, I think, yeah, just adding on to the what you said last, I think just doing an interview with anyone is like takes so much trust on the interviewee's part, but also on the like interviewer. So you're building a relationship with someone, a connection, and there is a lot of trust to be built to have before they can open up and tell you their life story. So yeah, definitely just making sure that you see this as a process, and it's not just like abruptly tell me, where it's not extractive. It's definitely it's includes two people and includes a lot of trust, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah. Also, you're gonna have to respect if they say no. You can't really push them or force them to talk about anything they don't want to, even conducting an interview. If they say no, they don't want to do an interview, you're gonna have to get used to that, because it's actually very hard for people to share sometimes, and sometimes they don't feel comfortable enough. So on our next slide and the next couple of slides, you're going to kind of see an example of a more formal procedure that most institutions use. So since we are a museum, we actually have to have a signed consent form. And we usually have something in the title where it says, like you hereby consent to kind of sharing with the museum, and this is what it's going to be a part of. It's going to be part of our collection, and it's going to help with the Arab American narrative and the different Arab American communities that we have. So we like to get their information just so we have it for our own records, and that way we're able to contact them at any point in given time, or they're able to contact us in time. So like you see, we like to get the name, address, telephone, email. As long as we have like the name and the address and either telephone or email, that's kind of like how, as long as we have three of those, I would say I think we're okay. Shada, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like standard oral history consent forms available through different universities or organization online that you can use if you're thinking of a specific project. But just making sure that this is relevant to you and it's easy for your interviewees to like just go through and complete. So definitely like just emphasizing personalizing it to your needs. It doesn't have to look like this. This is just an example of what we use. So
I mean, if you want it to look like that, that's fine. Imitation is the best form of flattery, so we're not going to say no. But also feel free to add your own colors and designs. So on the next slide, there's also a certain section where they're able to mark what exactly they would like to give consent to. First being the oral history release, which gives us the permission to conduct their oral history interview in any medium possible. So that means that, we can interview them, whether it's regarding video or audio, and we're able to transcribe it, and it can become a part of our archive and a part of our exhibits, and it can be used in any form that the museum sees fit. So whether that's for, not necessarily advertising, uh, instances, but it's more for like exhibitions, publications, research, and things like that. The next one would be the image release, which actually allows us to, if some of them usually have a photo that goes with it, so they can attach photos of their families with the oral histories, or if they talk about something specific and they happen to have a photo of it, or even if it's a picture simply of themselves, we do need them to check the image release. So we'll usually double check with them just to make sure that they marked everything that they needed. And if they mistakenly check something, we're able to correct that for them. Also, just kind of like we've been emphasizing that this is an ongoing process. So whether they mark both or not, they're also able to say, hey, I don't want this up anymore. Can you please take this down, or can you please take this photo down? Or I don't want my video up anymore. Can you just keep the audio, which is we have to legally abide by that. And then on the next slide, you'll see the most important part of the whole form is we need their wet signature, or as I like to call it, um, what's that called? I forget what that's
hand
called.
drawn.
What is it? The autograph?
Yeah, or like hand drawn with on
Yeah.
your computer. Just
Yeah, so I like to call it the autograph. We need their autograph just to kind of authorize that we need their consent. As you can see, there's also a section right under it where it says signature of parent or guardian. So these are for people that are under 18. We don't usually get interviews that are under 18, but in the case that we do have one, um, the parent would need to sign it. And yes, John Hancock. Thanks, Lana, for that. Um, that just threw me off guard. So they will also have to sign, the parent as well as the person interviewing, and then we will also have to sign it. So either Shada or I will sign it. And if we both do it, we both have to sign it. So we're just gonna kind of open the floor up for any questions that you guys might have. I hope we summed it up pretty well, but if we didn't, you're free to ask any questions that you like. So we did kind of have some follow-up questions also. Um, but I can save that for later if anybody has any questions.